The Origin of the Species, 1859. Darwin was a British naturalist. I mean, he was very smart, no question about it. And his book, The Appearance of Species, launched one of the greatest and most justly celebrated revolutions in the history of science, according to genetics.org. This man is, you know, if you have heroes in different, like when you think of basketball, who's the big heroes? Michael Jordan and LeBron. All right, so there's these people at the top, right? Okay, you think of football. Who are the people at the top? Cowboy. Like I said, all news is edited. Yeah. In every field of, you know, like in the Olympics, we have all these people now that are tops in the world and everything. Well, the top scientific theorist in the world, in the science communities of the world, is Darwin. He's right at the top. And so that's why they say that about him. Next slide. So here's something that the top scientist, theorist in the world said. I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered by natural selection, being more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouth over time, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale. Wow. You know, I've written a novel. This guy's a novelist. So that I didn't go over very well with the public, so he edited it out, the swimming bear, out of his later text. But today, if you go online, you'll see that Darwinian scientists believe that whales came from land animals. Whales came from land animals, probably a hippopotamus or a cow. That makes a lot of sense to me, right? Yeah, a cow would gradually get a bigger mouth and get some fins and want to dive in the water and swim around. And of course, that all happened by chance. That make sense to you? Yeah. All right, that's what I'm saying. So, next slide. What is a theory? Everybody knows Stephen Hawking, the guy in the wheelchair, can't talk. He's got a huge mind. He says, you can disprove a theory by finding even a single observation that disagrees with the predictions of the theory. That's from his book, Brief History of Time. Next slide. So we're going to show some of those exceptions to Darwin in a moment. I like what Dr. Michael Egnor says here. He's the professor of neurosurgery and pediatrics at State University of New York. Darwinism is a trivial idea that has been elevated to the status of the scientific theory that governs modern biology. Don't you love that guy? Now, there's a guy who's not only smart enough, a lot of scientists would love to say that, but they're afraid to. But this is a guy with some guts who actually said it. All right, next slide. So who knows about the second law of thermodynamics? All right, good, see some hands. It's actually, there are things in science that are theories, which are like good guesses, basically, with some evidence. And then there are things called laws that mean that nobody can question them. We all understand that? So the second law of thermodynamics, which is also called the law of entropy, states that there is a natural tendency in any isolated system to degenerate into a more disordered state. What does that mean? Go to the next slide. It means that everything's decaying. The universe is decaying, slowing down, the sun's getting cooler. Everything is going from a really, you know, it's like when you buy a new car, the entropy starts to take over. Things start to wear out, break, you know. Hopefully you got a good warranty. Well, science has never come up with any exception that goes around the second law of thermodynamics. There's no recorded experiment, as this physicist says, in the history of science. I'll go to the next slide, please. I'll just show it all. There's no recorded history in the history of science that contradicts the second law or its corollaries. And that's a famous physicist. And that's true. Evolutionists cannot cite any exception to the second law. But Darwin, remember, says you get this little cell in the prehistoric swamp slime kind of swimming around, and boom, by chance, lightning comes down, aliens, whatever. All of a sudden it develops into, wait for it, 8.7 million life forms. They think 8.7, how many organisms in the world? 8.7 million. Yeah, it's a miracle. I know. But see what that goes. It goes from this little one cell thing to something with millions of cells. So it contradicts. The second law of thermodynamics would say you can't go from a state of less organization to greater organization. It should be just the opposite. Okay. All right. Let me see where we at here. And the next slide says, this is just a quote from, he's a creationist, Duane Gish. Of all the statements that have been made with respect to the theories of origin of life, the statement of the second law of thermodynamics poses no problem for evolutionary origin of life is the most absurd. I hope you agree. And I'm telling you this stuff so that someday we can all show up at the school board in your city, and somebody will be the spokesman, but you'll sit there and you'll be there to support and pray and show your support. And we're going to say this kind of stuff to the school board. That's one thing that I plan to do. And I'm sorry that I haven't done it before, because I've known this stuff for a long time. But I've got even more ammunition now. And science has more ammunition to counter Darwin. All right. So next slide. And, okay, the fossil record. Now, this was Darwin's greatest fear. His greatest, he admitted it, that this was a problem for him. Next slide. So this is a very stylized, and this is for children, obviously. The tree of life is very big and long. It's got all kinds of branches and everything like that that somebody has drawn. But basically, down the bottom you have one cell, the true cell, which they can't tell you where that came from, except some scientists, Darwinians, think it came from aliens. And then you have one branch going all the way up to reptile on the right, another branch going up to spiders, and then one in the middle goes all the way up to mammals, which is us. We're mammals, right? Okay, so think of the complexity and the difficulty of going from one cell all the way up to a human being or to an elephant or a giraffe or anything. You know, that's a lot of differences, right? So next slide. So Darwin knew this was a problem. You have to have a lot of intermediate forms between each of these animals. Like you go from a bird to a horse. Okay, we'll try that one. A bird to a horse. Or a bird to, I don't know, a monkey, anything. So it has to be something that's part bird and then a little bit monkey and part bird, a little more monkey, part bird, and a little more monkey until you finally get to the monkey, right? I mean, if his theory is true and things gradually through minute mutations, of chance mutations over millions of years, they gradually change, they change a little, change a little, change a little, and boom, then another kind of animal comes out. That's what he's teaching folks. Think of it. You go from a bird to a monkey or a bird to anything. Between any two kinds of animals. When I say kinds, it means like cats, dogs, monkeys, giraffes. I'm not talking about all the different kinds of dogs, that's species. All the different kinds of horses, those are all horses. All the different kinds of moths, they're all moths. But you go from one kind of an animal, a dog kind, to a cat kind, to a horse kind, to a monkey kind, there has to be all these little intermediate things. So he says, Darwin, quoting him, from Origin of the Species, but just in proportion as this process of extermination by the weaker ones dying off has acted upon an enormous scale, so must be the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed be truly enormous. He expected you'd see it in the fossil record, all these little half bird, half this, half monkey, half that, till you get to the next kind of animal. Why then, I'm quoting from Darwin, why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Good question. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. Darwin was right there. And this, perhaps, is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against this theory. That was in 1859. And you know what? They still haven't figured it out. They still haven't come up with, as I'll make clear in a moment, this explanation, quoting from Darwin, lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. So what he's saying is we just need to dig more. Dig deeper, dig wider, whatever. But they're out there somewhere. I'm sure they're out there. Okay, next slide. So Darwin did get it right when he said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed in any animal, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. He got it right. Why isn't this ever quoted in the science books of our high schools and our colleges? Instead, they just say, Darwin knows it all. Darwin says this, so we're going to believe that. And they just go for it. And they teach all this atheistic pseudoscience out there. You know, you came from swamp slime and you're descended of monkeys. And well, we have to say that because Darwin came up with that idea, and he's obviously right. But he says right here, if you can't find all those little finely graduated intermediate forms from one kind to another kind, my theory would absolutely break down. Well, folks, they have not been found in 180 years since then. And they're never going to be found. So the next slide. Next, the two main problems that fossils create for Darwin. Number one is the Cambrian explosion. Anybody know what that is? Okay, I'll explain it in a moment. And secondly, there are absolutely no transitional fossils to prove gradual modification between any two kinds of animals. Absolutely none. I don't know how many different kinds of animals there are. Let's say there's 200. Absolutely none of one is half of this and half of the other. So, next slide. So Darwin, we'll take Darwin at his word. His theory has broken down. All right, the Cambrian explosion happened, they say, around 550 million years ago. It's in the, so Earth, they say, is 4.5 billion years old. So 550 years old. In the stratum, they look at stratum. So what's on top is the youngest, and down the bottom is the oldest, right? So they got to this stratum of dirt as they're digging down, called the Cambrian layer, and they saw this explosion of all these kinds of animals with complex body forms, multi-cell, and there's nothing below them. Wow, how'd that ever happen? This was known to Darwin during the writing of his book. He knew about the Cambrian explosion, and it really bothered him, and it should bother him. So now, and those, by the way, are pictures from the Cambrian. Actually, they're the animals in the rock. They're actual fossils right there. So this totally blows Darwin out of the water. It's supposed to be gradual, you know. And all of a sudden, these animals appear with nothing underneath it, and there's a whole bunch of them that appear. As you can see there, it just went up like a rocket, the number of animals that happened in the Cambrian. So the next slide. So they've come up, Darwinists have, with this term punctuated equilibrium. Gradual, burp, gradual, burp. And the burps are these, like the Cambrian explosion. They have no way of explaining them, but all of a sudden, this gradual change thing that Darwin predicted is being punctuated by this big explosion of life, for which they can't explain. So Richard Dawkins, that name mean anything to you? He's one of the best-known spokesmen for Darwin. He says, well, evolution is very possibly not, in actual fact, always gradual. So he's trying to, you know, make room for the Cambrian explosion. And then Dawkins goes on to say, but it must be gradual when it is being used to explain the coming to existence of complicated, apparently designed objects like eyes, the human eye. Even in Darwin's day, he knew, wow, how in the world did that happen? It is so complex. Well, of course, he didn't even know that the cell, what he knew today was like a Mack truck. He figured that's how simple it was. Today, we know the cell to be like a galaxy. That's how complicated it is. But in his day, it was like eyes. And then, so Dawkins goes on, for if it is not gradual in these cases, it ceases to have any explanatory power at all. And without gradualness in these cases, we are back to miracle, which is simply a synonym for the total absence of explanation. And that's what really bugs scientists. When they can't explain it through a materialistic, naturalistic process, it really galls them, because then they have to say, well, this is beyond the material world. And some scientists, including Dawkins, have admitted that maybe aliens did it. Maybe aliens brought life to our Earth, which of course is intelligent design. That's right. So intelligent design, when we go to the school board, we're not going with our Bibles. We're going with science, because intelligent design does not have to be connected to any religion or any God. Two major scientists, the co-founder of DNA, Sir Francis Crick, along with Watkins, back in '53, discovered the DNA double helix, okay? So after they studied it, Crick was asked, well, where do you think all this life began? And you know, this guy he's a rabid atheist, a rabid evolutionist. So he's like just as bad as they get that way. He says, well, I believe it's called, the answer lies in directed panspermia, which means that aliens came and put all the forms of life on the earth, and they grew from there. Directed panspermia. And Dawkins also says that's a possibility for how life began. Can you believe? And the reason which is intelligent design. So they're willing to admit that intelligent design has caused all of this as long as it's not divine. Anything but God, you know. An alien could do it, but not God. Do you see how that's a twisted point of view? Yeah, exactly. And that's why they're wrong. Okay. Transitional forms. Go show that. So here, we mentioned earlier about the whales. So the whale's on top, and there's some sort of a land animal on the bottom. And this is the artist's evolutionary conception of how you could go from whatever that is. Let's say it's a hippopotamus, and then you're a little bit, then it looks something like a, anyhow, these two intermediate forms would be intermediate animals between the land animal and the whale. That's what Darwin theorized. He guessed. He novelized. He's really a novelist, really, in a lot of ways. So, but that's what is not in the record, and that's what I want to show you by quoting some famous paleontologists, people who studied fossils all over the world. Next slide. So Evolution was written by Dr. Colin Patterson, who's an evolutionist, a staunch evolutionist, wrote this in '78 while being the senior paleontologist, that is fossil expert, at the prestigious British Museum of Natural History. Next slide. A creationist named Sutherland wrote to Patterson asking why he had not shown one single photograph of a transitional fossil in his book. Okay, we're looking for those transitional fossils, right? Patterson wrote an amazing confession, which was included in the book Darwin's Enigma. Okay, next slide. Where are we at here? Confession. All right. So this is world-renowned fossil expert, Colin Patterson, says, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of illustrations of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. Wow. One of the world's greatest experts says there are no transitional fossils. And then it goes on, you should suggest that an artist should be used to visualize such transformations. But where would I get that information from, since there are none? I could not honestly provide it, and if I were to leave it to artistic license, would that not mislead the reader? Wow, what a conclusion. And I have an example of where some art that your parents probably saw in their textbook was misleading, was faked. So, next slide. He went on to say, yet Gould, Stephen Jay Gould, who's a very distinguished Harvard professor of paleontology and a Darwinian, and the American Museum are hard to contradict when they say there are no transitional fossils. So anybody who knows fossils knows there are none. The fossil record actually is an argument for intelligent design. It destroys Darwin. And that was one of Darwin's biggest fears. Okay, let's go on to Ernst Mayr. Next slide. Ernst basically says the same thing. He's director of Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology, staunch evolutionist and atheist. In 1982, he admitted, even the fossil record fails to substantiate any continuity, and all novelties appear in the fossil record quite suddenly. Boop, 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 with nothing in between. Boop, 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 right? All the popcorn popping up and no intermediate pieces of half popcorn and half something else, all right? They just come up separately. Next one. Some of you have heard of Archaeopteryx. I can't even say it. Somebody say it. Archaeopteryx. There you go. Transitional. Some people have said this is the one example of half bird and half something else, reptile. So Dr. Alan Fiducia, world-renowned authority in bird and evolutionist himself, has stated, paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur, but it is not. It is a bird, a perching bird, And no amount of Paleo-Bible, love that word, Paleo-Bible, is going to, Paleo, Babel, that's what I said. Paleo-Bible is going to change that. How did I ever preach without my wife's help? I don't know. Next slide. Dr. Mark Ridley. I know I'm boring you. We'll just, Mark Ridley, next slide, basically says the same thing. Today there are over 100 million identified and cataloged fossils in the world's museums. 100 million. Man, that's a lot of calluses on a lot of hands that have shoveled and dug, and then to get the little brush out. 100 million of those. I mean, these people are serious about fossils. And so in 1981, Ridley, who was a professor of zoology at Oxford, was forced to confess, in no case, no real evolutionist, whether gradualist or punctuationist, all right, the burps, uses the fossil record as evidence in favor of the theory of evolution as opposed to special creation. So I could have a dozen more people of high regard in the scientific who say the same thing. The fossil record does not prove, in fact, it disproves Darwin to a very high degree. Next slide. Did you know that science sometimes makes mistakes? Carl Sagan, who was very famous as an evolutionist, in 1983, he co-authored an article, Nuclear Winter, Global Consequences of Multiple Nuclear Explosions. But in 1990, he said he was way off. Well, so for 7 years, everybody's trembling in their boots, but he was off. Next one, Piltdown Man. You ever heard of Piltdown Man? You know, they have Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, all these different half man, half ape, whatever, all only up to Homo sapiens. Well, 1912, he was thought to be the missing link. 40 years later, it was discovered to be a complete fraud by an amateur archaeologist in search of fame. Next slide. The Piltdown Chicken. Ever heard of that one? 1999. This is 1999. This is happening. A fossil from China allegedly showing a dinosaur with bird-like plumage was displayed triumphantly at the National Geographic Society and written up in the Society's November magazine. Well, it's got to be true. It's in National Geographic, right? It's in a museum. Come on, it's behind plastic. Later, it was proved to be a fraud. Desperate for proof, the evolutionists were fooled. So, the mistakes. Okay, now probably the most famous one is the next one, is Haeckel's drawings of embryos. So back in 1868, the most famous German scientist, evolutionist, was Haeckel, Hans Haeckel, I think. And so he drew these, I don't know if you can see it, but there's different names for these animals up at the top, frog and salamander and blah, blah, blah. And the one on the far right is the human. It's not a very good reproduction here. But anyhow, he shows them at different stages of embryonic growth, and he shows them to be very similar. They look kind of similar, right, way up at the top. So you got humans on this side, and you have a frog, I think, on that side, right? And look how all that similarity. So these were reproduced in textbooks starting in 1901 in the United States, all right? And went on into the well, you'll see in a moment. Next slide. So Haeckel first admitted that he drew them from memory. His own colleagues criticized him at the Jena University and convicted him of fraud at a university hearing. Wow. But we forgot about that. We forgot about that. So next slide. So for 100 years, starting in well, certainly after that, in the 1800s, his drawings, well, okay, Stephen Jay Gould, that famous professor of geology at Harvard, and he's an opponent of intelligent design, this guy. He's not on our side, he's on the other side. He says Haeckel's drawings are inaccurate and falsified. Woo! Next slide. So, all right, Haeckel's fake drawings. So in 1997, Michael Richardson, professor of evolutionary development, again, an evolutionist at Leiden in the Netherlands, admitted in Science magazine, which is like the Time magazine for scientists, Science magazine, in an article entitled Haeckel's Embryos, Fraud Rediscovered. He said that his team's investigation of Haeckel's drawings showed that they were to be one of the most famous fakes in biology. Next slide. All right. And so on the top is Haeckel, and on the bottom is Richardson. You see the differences? The problem with this is those were in American high school and college textbooks. I think the last one was printed in 2013. Up until 2013, these things, Haeckel's drawings, are still in college textbooks. And so scientists have known since day one that they were fakes, right? And Haeckel's own peers criticized him. And other people knew that, but they allowed it to go into science textbooks for over 100 years and didn't say anything. Just pretended, well, yeah, okay, you know. And so they're misleading young people into believing that Haeckel's drawings were accurate. He drew them from memory. And he knew that they were inaccurate, and they're very inaccurate. So that's an example of where science has deliberately, scientists and the educational community have deliberately misled the public. Next slide.